Afternoon, everyone. We will get started with the severe weather and / weekly briefing, really, but we're really going to focus a lot on the severe weather for threat for tomorrow. So let me exit out of this. I got the wrong date. There we go. So one of the main things we want to focus on is the severe weather threat for tomorrow. And let me skip forward to the next slide. Main points with this. There is a severe weather risk for tomorrow. And if you just focus solely on the parameters that are in place for tomorrow, the threat you would think would be much higher. In fact, that's some of the internal discussions we've had with the Storm Prediction Center this afternoon. Just based on the parameters alone, we would probably fall into the enhanced threat. However, there are other conditional factors that are potentially limiting the amount of convection that we get or we see, if at all. And so as a result of that, there's a lower confidence, and that lower confidence is what's allowing us to keep the risk more of it a slight risk. So there is a risk tomorrow. We can't let go of that because the factors that are inhibiting or potentially inhibiting the convection are something that could change. Northern Georgia is the primary focus with this area that you see in the graphic to the right. Chances will decrease with a southward progression. The threat appears to be conditional, as I was alluding to. The reason is we are looking at a fairly warm layer in the mid-levels of the atmosphere. That warm layer will act more like a mid-level cap to the storms. It may inhibit some of their development. At the same time, a lot of the energy that we typically see when systems come through will be lifting out to the northeast, away from the area and not basically progressing through the region. And as I mentioned, the severe weather parameters that we normally point to are more than sufficient to support severe storms. So the combination of all those things puts us in sort of a wait and see kind of a thing, and see how things start to play out tomorrow or things evolve over the next 24 hours. The main threats, if we can get storms to develop, would be north and west of a Columbus, Macon, Augusta line, but primarily focused on North Georgia, closer to where the stronger dynamics is. Damaging winds and tornadoes are going to be the primary threats. And there is a lot of wind with this system, which I'll get to in a minute. All right, so the updated SPC outlook for day 2. You can see here the slight risk, again, from Columbus to Macon, Augusta, north and west. And they just introduced an enhanced risk, primarily up in the Nashville area for strong damaging winds. That could expand or contract depending on how things evolve in the next 24 hours. The timing, which I'll get into in more detail in a minute, but basically we're looking at a line of showers or storms potentially entering West Georgia late morning at the earliest, and possibly into the afternoon, and we'll move east through the day and even potentially weaken through the day as it heads east. Again, the main threats are damaging winds, the potential for tornadoes, and brief heavy rain with that line. But again, it's all conditional. I'll break down the tornado probs. This is from the Storm Prediction Center, basically highlighting the greatest probability in brown. So along and north of I-20, essentially, and again, a better focus across North Georgia. We haven't had a North Georgia focus system in quite a while. A lot of it's been focused in Central and South Georgia, but this one, because the dynamics are closer to the northern part of the state, the greatest risk will be there. And again, the risk is conditional upon convection developing. You're going to see this word conditional quite a bit throughout the slides that I'm presenting today. Again, the timing, late morning through mid to late afternoon, really mid-afternoon to late afternoon is really when the threat really starts to abate a little bit. Again, I'll break down the timing in just a minute. Damaging wind threats, again, everywhere, basically inside the slight risk region. There is a possibility, and we were talking, and if anybody reads some of our discussions, they did contract the slight risk area a little bit, and it is possible that slight risk area could shrink a little bit further north and west. We'll just have to see with the next as the outlooks updates between now and tomorrow. Again, timing late morning through the afternoon, and the damaging wind threat is also conditional with storms. There is going to be a wind threat from just general wind throughout the day tomorrow, and I'll talk about that with the wind advisory. So the reason for the uncertainty, and this is basically looking at the upper levels, and this is a little loop that we'll go through. You can see the upper level system lifting to the northeast. All of the energy associated with that lifts to the northeast. Typically, when we get a lot of weather through here, the storm system will barrel its way through, and then we get a rush of cold air and the front comes through and everything else. That's not necessarily the case with this. It's lifting out, and so a lot of the energy is lifting out with it. So the closer you are to that, the greater the risk is that you have any severe weather, and that's why we're pointing to North Georgia having the greatest risk, where you can see there's not a lot of change in the lines across central Georgia, so we're not getting this big system to push through and basically change the dynamics aloft for much of Georgia. So it's really only that northwestern section that is at risk. The mid-level warm layer I noted a minute ago, it is in the models. It could potentially inhibit storm growth, and thus there's really a balancing act going on between storm growth and whether we get any and whether the shear plays a role in shearing them off before they have a chance to grow up. However, the caveat here is if that warm layer is not as strong or as deep, the storms could develop more broadly with the front as it comes in. And there is one or two models that are sort of suggesting that we could have a stronger storm or two. And I think I'll touch on that here in a minute. So it is the tale of possibility versus reality. This is one model from about 3 to 4 o'clock tomorrow afternoon. On the right-hand side is the model reflectivity. You can see there's not a lot on the radar, according to this model, because it's having a hard time developing showers and or storms. However, when we look at the instability in the shear on the left-hand side of the screen, the plenty of instability, which is one thing we typically lack with a lot of these systems. There's plenty of that around, and there's plenty of shear. So we have the basic environmental parameters in place, but there's just not a lot of sort of oomph to allow the storms to develop. And as a result, the models are struggling to produce any storms or convection. Here is another look at another model. This one's showing a little bit more convection, and thus something we would have to watch. This is around 4 o'clock tomorrow afternoon. A little bit slower than some of the models. This is on the slower end of things. But sometime in the afternoon, that line could develop and move through. Again, showing the shear and instability with both of them. There is plenty available. It's just a matter of whether storms can develop. But like I said, the parameters are in place for it. And as you note, if you look at the reflectivity in this one, there is a greater emphasis across the northern part of the state with this. It doesn't exclude the central and southern part of the state, but we are focused more on the north. So in terms of timing, this is the slow model, which basically goes back to the last slide that I showed. This would be around 2 o'clock or so, 1 to 2 o'clock, the line entering the northwest part of the state. By around 4 o'clock, getting into the I-85 corridor. And by 7 o'clock, the line really weakens and lifts out. And that loop that I showed you a minute ago with all of the energy lifting out, there really isn't a lot of push left to the front and to the storms. So as a result, the storms weaken with time through the day. So the key hours are going to be late morning into the early afternoon. And the key area will be, again, that northwest. The faster model, this is around 11 a.m., the line approaching from the west. This particular one does have a little bit more development further south, and as the line gets to about the 85 corridor, you can see a little bit more development in the I-85 corridor. And then, like similarly to the other model, you can see a lot of weakening with time. And so it's really a function of what time the storms arrive tomorrow. The early models would say or suggest approaching the west 10 to 11. The later models would suggest maybe 1 to 2 p.m. So there's about a 3 to 4 hour lag between some of the models on timing. And we'll just have to see how that evolves with time. into the overnight, into the morning. But nonetheless, one of the things we are looking at is that there is a weakening trend with time. And so the core window seems to be from about 10 to about 3 or 4 in the afternoon, with the greatest risk tomorrow afternoon. Now, out ahead of the system coming in, we are expecting strong winds to develop out of the south, gusting to 30 to 40 as a result. We have a wind advisory in effect from 7 a.m. to 11 p.m. Looking at our individual hourly grids, they really start to peak in that 10 to 11 through about 2 in the afternoon. So that seems to be the prime window when the winds will be pretty gusty, just ahead of that line. And then tailing off by the latter part of that time window as we get into the evening. 40 to 50 in the mountains. I know the Huntsville office in the Northwest just issued a high wind warning, and the Morristown office up there along the northern border does have a high wind watch, even though they are talking about doing a wind advisory, particularly in the southwest part near Chattanooga. Nonetheless, though, 40 to 50 mile an hour wind gusts are expected up in that region tomorrow, late morning into the afternoon. Rainfall, and this does include today, 1.5 to 2 inches across the north and the mountain areas, but generally speaking, 1 to 2 north of 85, and particularly across the north and the elevated areas. The gradient, as you can see from the graphic, does decrease with southward extent. So by the time you reach our southern areas, it may not rain at all tomorrow or through the rest of the period. So generally 1/2 inch or less along and south of I-20. So rainfall outside of some isolated issues across the north, we really don't expect a lot with this particular system in terms of rainfall. Going into next week, it's really this first system through tomorrow that is the big one. And then we set up for a nice weekend, temps near 70, lows in the mid upper 40s. And then a gradual warming trend into next week with a return of chance of rain Tuesday, Wednesday, with Wednesday being the highest out into the 7-day. Looking ahead, there aren't any severe or hazardous weather events, at least that we can see through 7-day, but we'll just have to wait and see how the midweek system evolves next week. So I think with that, in summary, again, the severe threat, we have one tomorrow. There's a lot of conditions put on it. As I mentioned, the environmental parameters are pretty good, and outside of any other time, this would be something we would be really severely focused on. And it was something discussed with us in the SPC about enhanced risk for tomorrow. There just isn't a lot of confidence that we're going to see any strong, deep storm convection develop as a result of the limiting factors for tomorrow. So if those things can be overcome, then yes, the damaging wind threat and the tornado risk would be realized by the environmental parameters that are out there. So we'll just have to wait and see. And we hope to get an email out on the overnight shift tonight into tomorrow morning. We do have some staff in here tomorrow morning. We'll just see how things evolve, and feel free to give us a call in the ops if you have any questions or specifics on timing or how things evolve. Storm Prediction Center will update. We'll go to their day one outlook sometime after midnight tonight, and we'll see how things evolve through the day. So with that, I will end the recording and take any questions you have in the chat.